Welcome, everybody. This series of talk is a part of a distributed answer to a global crisis, an online event organized by FabLab OpenDot here in Milan as part of the EU-founded project Distributed Design. So a platform that wants to put in contact the maker movement and the market itself, but it's also a way to show the power of a distributed production. And during this COVID-19 emergency, the power of the maker community really stood up. And for the first time, an entire large set of different organizations around the world started to make solutions to fit the needs locally for the people that didn't get access to the industrial production because of different reasons. Partially because the industrial production failed a bit in distributing the solutions in time, and partially because the innovations moved that fast that no company would be able to actually keep pace with what happens. So just to give a number that, in my opinion, it's impressive, since the beginning of the crisis, almost 1 million solutions for health and care has been produced each week. And that's something that basically no industrial production or no company can achieve on a global scale. So to us in OpenDot, open solutions for health and care is a very important topic. We worked on it for a few years now, and we are really happy to see how much the community picked it up and how much it became almost natural that we are capable to find a solution just because experts in health and care speaks with designers and makers, and they figure out easy solutions that can be easily implemented and distributed. A perfect example, in our opinion, about this is what we're going to talk right now about. That is the project of the intubation box. So with us today, I'm happy to introduce to you Dr. Benjamin Reeser and Tina Reeser, his wife. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. They worked during the last week a lot on the intubation box project, and you can check out their effort on the website intubationbox.com. So Benjamin is a physician and specialized in emergency medicine, while his wife Tina is a designer and project manager. And together they worked a lot in spreading this idea of the intubation box. And we are very happy that you took the time and the effort to do so. So first of all, thank you very much. It's a project that we loved and replicated quite a lot of times. A lot of labs actually in Italy worked on this, and they are still working on that with different hospitals to customize it for different tools and different procedures that the hospitals have. So I'd like to ask you, how's the situation in the US at the moment, and what are you working with?
Well, so at least from a medical perspective, from me being just one physician in one's perspective, we're still seeing a lot of cases. Case numbers haven't really gone down or gone up. They stayed pretty steady, at least out in the West where I'm at. At the same time, we've got some states that are opening up and no longer enforcing, the stay-at-home policies, where other states aren't. And then within those states, certain cities are opening and other cities aren't. And so it's been amazing, everything being shut and what it's been doing. And in my opinion, medically speaking, it saved countless lives just because of the way that it's allowed the healthcare system in the United States to take the patients as they come and not have them all dumped on them at the same time. This is one of those things that we have no real data on other than what we've been able to scramble together in the last, 6 to 7 weeks kind of thing. And sorry, my daughter's pulling cables. And in that amount of time, we have all these projections, all these people looking at this very limited data and trying to make these big decisions. And it's, in my opinion, you know, a big gamble a lot of times. But either way, it's not over yet. We have stabilized in the sense of it feels like, you know, people know how to do this. They know how to navigate the system and the way that infection is happening. But really, a lot of things that have helped with a lot of the other healthcare workers, including myself, is we went into this with a lot of anxiety about the fact that, you know, this is a brand new threat. We're used to all of these other threats that we trained on, that we've learned about. And even in emergency medicine, we kind of act as cowboys. We run towards the problem. We jump into the room with the person bleeding out. We do all this stuff. And it's part of the fun of being an emergency physician. And rarely do we take a step back and think of our own mortality. And this whole situation has really made us hit the brakes and be like, oh my gosh, is this gonna make me sick? Am I gonna catch this? Am I gonna take this home to my family, my loved ones? And, you know, what about my grandparents? What about you know, like, just all of this kind of stuff is something that we normally just don't have in the front of our brain when we're dealing with a broken leg or a gunshot wound or a pneumonia or something like that, that we normally are dealing with on a daily basis at work. So all of us had just a lot of anxiety about it, and all these people have started innovating, coming up with new ways to try to help, you know, keep us safer. And beyond just keeping us safe is really helping with our anxiety levels, and helping us being able to focus and do our jobs and do what we were trained to do, in the sign of this, you know, in this huge monster that's come out of nowhere that we're all battling, kind of thing.
So you had some troubles with supplies of protection system, or you know, the medical supply in general in US as well, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, every hospital has, you know, a small amount of stuff. Some places that tend to get more types of infections sometimes stockpile a little bit more. But across the board, there was really no preparation and no preparedness when it came to having to all of a sudden, all of your staff needs to be in protective equipment, as opposed to just one or two of your staff members need to be in protective equipment. And one of those staff members once or twice on a shift, where now everybody that's around these patients, the whole shift between rooms, changing medical protective equipment back and forth, like it's an exponential growth in the need for the numbers of protective equipment, and that just wasn't even remotely available. And so that's part of the reason that there was such a scramble for everything across the, you know, the PPE spectrum of equipment. And you know, you also probably heard a lot about ventilators, especially for the people that, you know, were on the end where they were, you know, very sick and couldn't breathe for themselves anymore and whatnot. And it's just been a scramble for the last 6 to 8 weeks now here in the United States. And certain parts of the country have been hit significantly harder. You know, you've got a lot of it relative to people living closer together versus people living farther apart. And the United States is such a big place that we've seen the entire spectrum of, you know, there's nobody in this entire town that's infected, or there's 20 to 40% of this entire city that's got infected, or just things like that, where it's just the whole spectrum of it has been available because of the demographic of the United States being so different. You know, it's like a bomb is going off in New York, where people in the middle of Arkansas are like, what infection? What are you talking about? Nobody's sick. Everybody's fine, you know, but they may live on a farm or live in a more rural area, or only see other people at church on the weekend, you know, and so they don't even have the ability to become infected. And they all drive cars, where everybody in New York is in a small, you know, metal tube going underground, where they're all breathing each other's, you know, air. So it's because of all that, it's created this environment that has people in the middle of the problem screaming for help and trying to fix things, and people out with not any real exposure to it, being doubting and being skeptical to it. And it's a real bummer because it's a real threat. And so everybody's tackling it from different perspectives, though, at least.
Yeah, and you were telling me before that at the beginning, because of the shortage in protective equipment, you were finding your own creative way to stay safe.
Right. So one of the things that I was doing as a physician, specifically in the emergency department, a lot of times before we decide that somebody is going to need to be put on a ventilator, we have to intubate them. And intubation is the action of basically putting a tube into the trachea, into the airway of the patient, and securing it there so that we can then connect that tube to the ventilator machine. The process of doing that, basically, what we call a blade or a scope goes in the mouth of the patient so that you can visualize the airway. And then a tube goes in that has a stylet in it, like a rigid stylet that goes in. So both of these things go into the mouth of the patient. They're sedated, they're laying on their back. And when you visualize the airway, you get that tube into it, you pull that blade out, and then at the same time, you hold the tube in and you pull that stylet out. That activity itself, each time something comes out of the mouth, is taking particles that are, very, very small and aerosolizing them and throwing them up into the air, throwing them right into the face of the physician, throwing them right into the face of the respiratory therapist or the nurses or whoever is assisting, and just bringing it up into the air in that room. And we're already wearing, our glasses, a mask, maybe a face shield kind of thing, but it still doesn't change the fact that we're still just throwing stuff right into our faces. And so early on, we were scrambling with the way to have some sort of barrier. And so we were literally taking clear trash bags and just cutting them in half and just draping them over a patient, and then trying to visualize through a wrinkled trash bag to intubate these patients while still protect ourselves and the rest of the staff around, kind of thing. And I mean, it worked as well as you can probably imagine it is. It's almost more trouble than it's worth. And so we were just kind of scratching our heads and trying to figure out a way to not expose ourselves. And that's just one small example of all the different things that are happening. Another good example is IV tubing line. In the ICU, when you've got a really sick COVID patient, they're on a ventilator, they've got all sorts of medicines being given to them. The pumps that these medicines are hooked up to that are then feeding in the IVs into the patient, they're normally right near the bed, so they're not that long. And the nurse has to go in and out every time the pump needs a rate adjustment or something like that. Every time the nurse has to go in and out of that room to do that, she has to put on new protective gear, re-expose herself. So what was the simple fix to that? Longer IV tubing lines. Like just something simple as that. People are like, oh crap, we just need to do a little bit of math because of the way that the fluids are going to be fed from the pump to it. But that's it. And get longer IV tubing lines, do a little bit of testing. And now all those medicines and all those bags actually sit outside of the room. They go in through the lines into the room, kind of thing. And that cuts down a huge amount of exposure. And that's, again, just these small little things, but people were just scrambling to figure out what we can do to protect ourselves and not burn through all of our protective equipment because it started to become very scarce and very valuable very quickly.
Yeah, and need is the best fuel for creativity. So the fact that you definitely need something, then you start to think about solutions for that. So somehow you designed your own version of the intubation box before knowing that the intubation box existed, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we kind of realized we needed a barrier. We didn't really know what to do, so we just used what we had at hand, which was the environmental services stack of clear trash bags that were sitting on a shelf.
How did you get in contact with the intubation box project?
So originally, I was on just an online forum that a lot of emergency physicians use, and everybody was kind of having the same issues where they're like, oh my God, we're using trash bags, or somebody was using just a piece of plastic that somebody was trying to hold over top of them. And kind of out of nowhere, somebody mentioned, oh, hey, there's a physician, Dr. Lai out in Taiwan, who made this real straightforward box. It just sits over the head of the patient. Check this out. And I took a look at that, and I was like, this is so straightforward and simple. This is all we need. Just something that we can just put over them. Why didn't I think of that? Why don't we already have this in the medical field? Why is this not already standard of care? It's so straightforward and simple. So it basically, I saw the designs. Within 20 minutes, I was on the phone with a couple different people trying to see who had access to, acrylic and solvents and the ability to, cut them for me and help me get a prototype done. My wife, who sadly ran off, is wrangling our child at the moment, was able to get me in contact with one of the guys that does R&D for her work, which is a mattress company. And I got a hold of him. I sent him the plans. I told him what I wanted to do with them. The original plans was just basically like you've seen, just a box. We ended up looking at it and saying, okay, this was designed in Taiwan, so the body size is going to be significantly smaller. And I originally basically took a cardboard box and cut it out and just taped it together to the size of what the original design was. And I laid down, because I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", 250 pounds. I'm a big guy. And I laid down on the table, had my wife put it over me. And she's like, you don't fit in this, kind of thing. And so we were like, okay, we got to expand this and make it bigger. So we made it wider. We took the holes on the end of it for the hands, and we made those the diameter. We increased that a little bit too, just because, again, I don't have massive forearms, but with the size that it was, trying to have a bit of dexterity in there, I was hitting the sides, and so we increased that. And then at the last thing we did was put a lip on the end of it, because as you're aerosolizing particles out of it, they can still hit and kind of flow forwards, and there just wasn't a lip yet. So we just came down a few centimeters and created a lip so that it at least has kind of a catch. And again, none of this was 100%, but it was still way better than nothing. And so with that kind of change in the design, we were able to get a prototype done basically within 24 hours. I took it to work the next day. I had all the other physicians around me, and we put a couple different nurses on the table and used them as as test dummies kind of thing. And they were great sports about it. And we all used our equipment, put our hands in and out, try to just make sure that we felt that we could still do what we need to do with this. And we basically, everybody was like, this is perfect. This is what we need to use. And so that kind of solidified it as something that needed to exist now as a regular tool in our armament for healthcare kind of thing.
No, that's amazing. How long did it take for you to get from okay, I want to make this, to the first usable prototype?
Not even 24 hours. So like it was maybe 2 p.m. when I came across the original design, and I started just sending it out to people and be like, hey, do you know anybody that has a plastic shop or anybody that does this? And literally my wife was on a phone call meeting, and I was already sending these things out. And then when I mentioned it to her when she got off of her meeting, she's like, oh yeah, no, the R&D guy at work can do it. And he ended up being the first person I got in contact with. And he was like so excited about it because he didn't have anything that, he was personally doing to help fight the pandemic kind of thing. And he was like, he just dropped everything that he was doing. And we were on the phone for that whole evening, basically going back and forth with the design. And he ended up staying at the place really late until the evening. And then the next day he did the rest of the cutting, and I went down there and we did the gluing and kind of put it all together. And I was able to then go in maybe at 4 or 5 p.m. that next day into work and take it with me. And then that box never left that emergency department. We still have the original prototype there, that's now been through hundreds of intubations. And we've improved on it since then, but that one still works and is still better than nothing. And so it's still getting used. And so it's thankfully withstanding at least the small test of time that it's needed so far.
I will tell your story to my students here in Milan. I'm teaching to designers, and I'm always trying to push them to do more prototypes and more iteration of the same idea instead of, just desk research, because you really understand so many things just trying out. As you said, piece of cardboard that you tape together gives you so many information that you don't see in a computer visualization or 3D CAD. So you started from the original idea. You said this is too small for the average American person, so I will change it and eventually add something because of the tool we use. I've seen a lot of projects that spinned off from the intubation box, and that's another amazing part of an open project. Do you have a track of which kind of modification has been done?
So, I mean, literally within that first 24 hours after we had that prototype, and I went to the hospital, tried it out, and I felt safe using it as a physician and that other physicians could use it. We had another buddy who got a website for us, and we put the plans up and just started broadcasting them to as many medical networks as we could kind of find. And within a week's time, we had so many people back and forth saying, we can make this, or hey, what about doing this, or what about doing this to it? What if we switch the material? Hey, I can make it for cheaper, I think, with this material. That we ended up even having to just make a forum on the webpage, because so many people who at one part aren't really working as much right now because so much of the country is on lockdown, who are looking for something to do in general, and then looking for something to do that's going to help. I think we were probably one of the first, if not the first, to market in the sense of taking the design, changing it, putting it on the internet, showing people that it works, having photos up, and other people across the country ran with it. There was another group on the East Coast that 4 or 5 days after us started to GoFundMe, also put up a web page, started taking requests, started putting those boxes out. We were having groups that were emailing us saying, hey, what if you drill another hole on this side so that the respiratory tech can help? Or what if we put a drape over the end of it to create, more sealant? Or what? There was just so many things that were day by day. Every time I would wake up and look in the inbox of my email, there's just 60 to 70 to it just growing and growing of all these people like coming up with all these ideas and all these different changes. And by that point, Tina had started answering a lot of those emails and going through a lot of that stuff. And so she actually probably knows about even more of the innovations that people were coming up with, just because I was still working full time in the emergency department, doing my 12-hour shifts kind of thing. While we were trying to get all this going after, the first 2 days, when I just wanted one for my ED for myself to use. But so many people took those designs and just went crazy with them. And that was really all we wanted to happen, was that I did it. I was able to find people within 24 hours that could make the box for me. Like, everybody else should be able to do that and more. And so that was originally what we wanted to have happen. And that's exactly what happened. And so it was great. And we even kind of sent a message to Dr. Lai on Facebook. My wife was able to find him. And she's from Taiwan also, so she speaks Taiwanese, and was able to connect with him and be like, hey, we took your design, we're using it, it's saving lives. We've changed it a little bit. There's hundreds of people using it now. And he was really receptive and really happy about it. And so we felt like we were just doing the right thing. And we were really excited to see so many people just come out of the woodwork. We eventually came to the point where we had too many people that were saying, like, we can make these boxes for you, we can do all this. What hospitals do I send them to? And there was just so much coordination that needed to go on with that there was some people that were like, look, we're going to list you as somebody that can make it. Hopefully people reach out to you, because I don't have the capacity to coordinate thousands and thousands and thousands of these things going out. I'm not an Amazon shipping warehouse kind of thing. And that's what it kind of turned into.
But do you have some numbers of the people involved in the project, the number of boxes made?
We do. So as of probably a week ago, just from us, we have gotten over 500 boxes fabricated into hands of other physicians, other CRNAs, people that need them, kind of thing. I know we have outfitted almost every hospital in Arizona, a good portion of California, and then everything else has just been all over the country. I mean, we've been sending them all as far as we can kind of send them within range of shipping costs and things like that. But at least I know we've gotten out, I think about the last count was about 523 or so, kind of thing. And then I know the group on the East Coast has gotten up into the hundreds. And then I know that countless more have been made. Including you guys, I've been contacted by people all over the world, people in Germany, people in South Africa, Italy, like just all over, that are taking the design, making it. Some people in those countries were like, hey, can you send me a box? I'm like, I can't send a box to Germany or to Uruguay. Like, you got to make your own. Here, it's just, I'll even put you in contact with other makers and other people that have like told me they could do it. So if you have questions, you know, because my background is not in plastics and not in any sort of architectural design. I do very basic woodworking and metalworking. And so I was like, I can't answer all of the technical questions. Thankfully, my wife actually answered a lot of the technical questions that people had. We had a lot of people coming back and saying, like, you know, what if we use this type of material instead? What about polycarbonate instead of the acrylic? Is that going to be stronger? Is it going to hold up over time? And it is stronger and it would hold up more over time, but it's way more expensive than you know, this thin acrylic that we're using, kind of thing. And I had a university in India who were really concerned about how to clean it properly and not damage it. And thankfully, acrylic can handle up to a high percentage alcohol on it, and it doesn't streak it. It doesn't kill it. If you use Windex, then that will streak it. But just regular alcohol wipes are fine. And I kind of set up a very small protocol of how to clean it properly. And you know, and again, when it comes to this whole project and things like it, nothing has gone through the FDA, where, you know, at least in the States, that's what kind of approves all sort of medical devices, you know. But this is a time of a pandemic, and this is best practices are in mind. And so we're doing the best that we can with what we have. And thankfully that's better than nothing. And a lot of times in the normal rigmarole of like getting devices into hospitals and doing things, in at least in the United States, like it's got to go through weeks and weeks of meetings and review boards and all this red tape. And the way that I kind of wanted to circumvent that sort of congestion was I was sending these boxes just directly to other physicians and saying, you put this together at home, here are the instructions, and you take it in. And that's what enabled us to not really fly under the radar, so to say, because we weren't trying to do anything wrong, but we wanted people to be protected, and we wanted it to happen now. And that was the best way to get it to happen. And thankfully that's worked out. Very few of the hospitals did they get any pushback where they're like, oh, has that been approved by ABCDE? You know, because then the physician can come back and say, well, so you want to take away this protective device? You want to make it more exposure to your staff? And that shut down administration in a lot of places very quickly, thankfully. And they exist for a reason, and we can't get away from administration. But at the same time, like, they're sitting at home on their couch while we're in a room with all these sick people. And so I think, thankfully, they could look at our perspective and see where we're coming from on it.
Yeah, you pointed out a lot of important points in what you just said. So I would like to start from the fact that very often we overestimate who started the project and the idea itself. So we like the stories of the creative genius that had the idea first, but without the contribution of you in bringing it in US and spread it out and spread the idea and distribute it. And Tina as well, of course, because if I got it right, at a certain point you you, Tina, took over more in the development and the technical part, but also the fundraising and the management of the thing, right?
The operation, basically the logistic of, okay, we got a request on the website now. What do we do with it? What are the process of actually getting the box to this doctor who just requested one box? So that's kind of what I manage. I work with our friends who essentially are our volunteers in helping to make this whole thing possible and making sure that everybody knew when the torch was passed down to them, what direction to run and who to pass it to next.
So how did you do that part? Set up the crowdfunding campaign? Was it smooth? Did you get problems to find people interested in supporting, or was it easy?
No, it was actually quite simple. We have a master Google spreadsheet where we would track status of everything, and then the people that were involved in the project had access to it, and we would make sure that everybody was assigned, and then everybody was updating what they're supposed to do on the sheet, so that everyone else on the team was aware of what's happening.
Yeah,
and it ran really smoothly. I mean, we were surprised. I was surprised, but it worked. It was, yeah.
I think that a lot changed. I'm a designer too, so we have a similar background, and I think that a lot change in the processes when people feel like they have a common goal that everybody believes is a good thing to do. And at that point, a lot of tensions just disappear and it's easier to work together. I don't know if you had a similar experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And early on, when we realized that it wasn't just going to be us putting the plans out there and then stepping back and returning to our lives, it was going to be all these people asking for us to get boxes to them. We realized, like, oh, we have no way to, like, are we going to ask people to pay us and then send them a box? Like, we don't have a company. We don't have anything like that. It's just, you know, the two of us with our full-time jobs and lives trying to sort out what to do. And so, you know, GoFundMe, I'd never even, I think, been on the GoFundMe webpage and so I had to figure out how to create that. And through Tina's network, we were able to have friends help us set that up. I had another buddy that had done fundraising in the past for some projects out in LA, and he was great about jumping on board and just phone calls kind of thing, and reaching out to his network. And so with the GoFundMe and basically social media, which prior to all of this, you could not find me online. I had no social media presence. I didn't want one. I still don't really want one, but they can't change that now, kind of thing. But so I really was not in that world very much. And people were able to just reach out and do that. You know, a couple of the local news stations got wind of what was going on, and they came and interviewed us and put the word out more, and that really helped. It all snowballed into people donating. You know, at the end of the day, the GoFundMe raised $40,000, and it was costing us, at first it was costing about $200 to make one of the boxes and to ship it. Once we realized that we had to make a lot more, and I was able to get a couple other places to make them for me per my design kind of thing that we had finalized, we brought the price down just because they were able to buy in bulk and things like that. But it all kind of steamrolled, and then we started to have a couple other larger investors, or well, not investors, but just donators that came in. Flex Seal, the company that makes the tape and the glue and all that stuff, the guy that sawed the boat in half and glued it back together, they got wind of us and they came on and they donated a lot of money, donated products. They were very helpful. We had local charities and things like that that just kind of came out of nowhere And a lot of it was just word of mouth. A lot of it was like somebody would post on Facebook, hey, look at what's happening. And that person would see it and be like, hey, my daughter's a nurse, or my, and send that to them. And then that person would distribute it to their network of people. And, we would just be inundated by parents actually of healthcare workers. And they're like, hey, my son's a respiratory therapist. My daughter's an ER physician. Like, how do I get this into their hospital? And I'm like, well, put me in touch with your daughter, give them this and have them request it from us, kind of thing. And I mean, in a good way, fear helped motivate the distribution of the information and the idea, and then people's just goodwill on top of that really just helped everything just take off. And it felt like we were building an airplane while flying it, and it was great, but it was so much all at once, and so much of that coordination Tina was able to just, because it's kind of what she does at work a lot of times, just sit down and just bam, 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 this is what we need to do. This is how we need to direct this. Because everybody was starting to work on things all at once and do it their own way and trying to do it the right way, but there was no process and there was no protocol. There was no just simple, no, just do it this way. That way everybody else can see what you're doing, and things will work in a unified forward motion, and that's exactly what happened. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing that I think it's interesting is that this scaling up of the original idea came out of you two, so a combination of medical knowledge and design and project management knowledge. So. Right. A lot of the innovation that we try to push in hospitals here in Milan, in OpenDot, is based on co-design. So we suggest designers to work, next to a healthcare professional and learn from them what they need and design around their specific needs and see how they operate every day. Somehow that got natural in your family because what you do every day. But I think it's not a coincidence that the project was a brilliant idea done by someone globally, but it scaled up when it met this combination of knowledge on the field and design skills. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think that's another important part that we have to keep in mind for future innovations in this field, pushed by emergencies or not, hopefully. The other part that you spoke about, and I think that's another key point, is about certifications. So you said we can't wait FDA to approve the process. At the same time, it's open source versus patents, communities versus company. So somehow the fact that it's open, not approved, but used consciously by physicians, makes it safe and fast. The fact that it's an open project, makes it agile and easy to spread, while bringing it into a company would slow it down a lot, actually.
Right. And so yeah, that's exactly it. So when you normally have something that you want to introduce into the market or into the healthcare system, there's obviously somebody on the back end that's doing it not for the greater good really, but just to make money. And I mean, we're in a capitalistic society, so that's how it's set up, and it makes sense that that's how it works. But because of that, there's so many moving parts that all have to have their piece and have their say, that it takes forever for anything to get done. And after we were a week or two into this whole thing, and we were making these and sending them out, and because we were very adamant that any physician that requested them got them for free. Like, we did not want anybody who was already risking their life working on the front line to have to pay anything to be safer, because they were already paying with the risk of their lives and their families and you know, their circle of loved ones kind of thing. And so we were very adamant about that. But we became kind of worried that somebody was going to take this thing, even though we had made it very clear that this is an open source thing and Creative Commons license. And we were worried that somebody was going to take it and do some real little thing to it and patent it and then block people from making it. Now, I don't really know anything about patent laws and things like that, but I did end up reaching out to a friend who is a lawyer, who got me in touch with a patent lawyer who said, no, this has been out there and it's so well circulated now, and there's so many things that have been done to it, additions, changes, alterations that have then been also published under the Creative Commons, that it's going to be nearly impossible for somebody to actually take the design and then lock it down with a patent and stop people from making it. And that was like a real weight off of our chest when we found that out, because we were worried that, you know, some big manufacturing company or something was going to see that and be like, oh, I can make dough off of this. I can make money. Let's lock this down. Let's be evil. And we were very happy to see that couldn't really happen. And so if anything, the fact that so many people jumped on board, started duplicating the design, altering the design and going stuff, and then throwing it back out there, protected it in a way from evil capitalists, so to say. So that was something we were really happy to find out about.
And it's interesting to say, to think about the fact that patents at the beginning were a way to speed up innovation. So there's also an interesting story on how agile the American system was creating new patents compared to the European one, and that helped America to become the lead in technology innovation. And now somehow it's flipping, it's backwards. So patenting something means to slow it down a lot.
Right. I mean, companies will buy somebody's patent and just not do anything with it so that their market share and their items aren't affected. And that's just evil, in my opinion. It's just horrible. But it's also, I guess it makes sense from a business perspective. But there's no conscience in business, in my opinion. So it's hard to argue with business itself because it's there to just make money. So I understand what it's doing, but it doesn't make it any less disappointing when things like that happen.
But do you think that what's happening in these emergency moments will actually affect what will happen in the everyday life after? So do you think that it's going to be easier to bring innovation in hospitals, or the rules will be always the same? And
I mean, I hope that it will be different. I think that a lot of people in the positions that normally were the gatekeepers for allowing innovation to come in a quicker way are aware of the utility in it. And I'm very hopeful that that becomes a reality and that we don't have to slog through years of approval and meetings to get innovation into hospitals. But at the same time, I mean, people love their forms, and people often, their only job is to, you know, slow things down and kind of justifying their own usefulness. And that a lot of times can slow these things down. And so I just don't know I know we're not going to be able to hit the ground running like we'd like to, but I think we're going to have a lot less chains tying us down moving forward. Or at least that is my hope. Because it's been very obvious that there's been a lot of things that have been made in the last couple months out of sheer necessity and innovation that are saving lives. And how do you argue that not being a good thing?
So she seems to agree as well.
So she's probably sick of hearing me talk.
So there is another thing that's popped in my mind when you were speaking. The fact that in US or in Italy, in Europe in general, we have the luxury to think and design and develop. And very often, if this project gets locked down somehow because of regulation, centralized production that can't ship everywhere, and so on, it will not reach a lot of the countries around the world that could actually benefit from it. And you were saying that some of these countries actually got in contact with you. Do you have an overview on, let's say, less rich countries compared to the northern?
Well, so I mean, we had quite a few companies that, so I was surprised to get contacted by like a physician in Nigeria who was like, hey, I don't know how to make this, but I'm going to try and find somebody. What else do I need to know? And, you know, there was a good amount of places like that. I mean, we had people in Vietnam contacting us, South Korea, a lot of places in Central and South America, who were just, I feel like in some of the more like well-off countries in the EU, you know, places like that, they were just contacting more, asking about alterations of it or projections of how to do this and how to do that, where a lot of these other countries were just like, can you just send me some? Because, you know, I know that in some of those places they did end up getting able to fabricate them themselves. And it was a bummer when I had to tell them, like, I have no capacity to send 3 boxes to Nigeria. Like, the shipping alone and to get them there in some sort of fast manner is going to cost more than just the box itself, you know. And so I had to take a utilitarian angle at it and be like, well, where can I do the most good from what I can do? But there was a lot of places that I felt that, you know, for example, like Germany, I got contacted by 5 to 10 different places who were just like, hey, we're doing this. People would send us pictures of like 50 boxes that they made and just be like, hey, look, we took the design, we made these boxes and they're going to these hospitals. And that was amazing to hear and see. And most of that came from the more developed countries, you know, kind of like you mentioned. I mean, we were happy to see that happening, but at the same time, like, you know, it would have been great if I had the ability of Amazon to create 5,000 of these things and just shoot them all over the country and then all over the planet, kind of thing. But I mean, that wasn't something that we had the capability to do, but at least getting the plans out there, and, you know, necessity being the mother of invention and the mother of innovation, and the motivator that people had, that even in these developing countries, the boxes were getting made, or some sort of type or some sort of similar device was being fabricated, thankfully. And we've got pictures of that. We had people that were sending us photos where they were taking PVC pipe and just making a box out of that, and then just like putting clear tarp over it because they couldn't get a cork. And we had people that were showing us where they're like, hey, I had all this in my backyard, these old things that I put them together. Do you think this will work? You know, like just stuff out of nowhere that people were taking. I was like, hey, you know what? That'll work perfect like once, but I don't know how you're going to clean that properly, but take it to the hospital anyhow, because you're in the middle of Ghana. Like, so just do it, you know? So that was really cool to see people doing that. I mean, I think that's the same with a lot of the countries that were scrambling to try to do it themselves. They have that same problem with the whole medical field and just general supplies and medicine in general, like antibiotics and things like that, you know. And I can't speak to the specifics of a lot of that, but having lived and worked in a couple other countries in the medical capacity, like, it's always amazing the things that people do to get by with so little, compared to the culture that we have in the United States of like, use it and throw it out kind of thing. Like, that doesn't happen in a lot of countries. Like, you don't just use it and throw it out. That's an anathema to those people. Like, why would you ever do that? Like, I'm going to use the thing until it falls apart. I'm not going to just use it once and throw it out. And that's what we're hoping happens with these intubation boxes. Like they're hard eventually, but they're going to hopefully last us at least through the worst of this pandemic, and then we can easily make more, hopefully.
So just like one last thing. Do you have future plans? So what's the next step? Do you need help for something? Did you struggle with something and you need support with that?
So, I mean, so we're now at about 7 weeks almost since we started the whole thing and got the plans out there and started sending boxes out and raising money and things like that. And for a good portion of it, we were inundated with requests, and things have finally kind of plateaued out and slowed down. And so I think a lot of hospitals that wanted the box have either got one from us or created their own or found a fabricator, things like that. So the scramble has stopped, thankfully. But now we have so many people that are contacting us and saying, hey, okay, now we need to look at, can you guys help us taking this box and altering it? How do we make it a better negative pressure environment? How do we make it work with dentistry? How do we change it so that I can do endoscopies? There's so many other things that when we take a step back and realize how often we expose ourselves to people just doing our day-to-day job, like, okay, so now what do we do? Is every patient going to be in a fish tank now, and we're going to be, acting like they're a child in an incubator with our hands in there? Like, how are we going to move forward and do this? And so, I mean, at first we were both just like, well, hey, we want to just get back to our normal lives. Like, this thing took over our lives, for almost 2 months now, and not in a bad way, but in a very surprising way, and we just weren't expecting it at all. But now at the same time, like, it is exciting to try to move forward with it, and at least now we don't have to give our whole existence to it like we did for a couple months. Now we can be like, okay, well, we know what works and what doesn't work. And some of these larger groups are going to take it. And because a lot of universities have taken the box and are now starting to do tests with them. A while back, a group of anesthesiologists from Boston, took the box and did some tests with it. Things like that are starting to happen now. And people better equipped than us are taking that torch and running with it, thankfully. But if anything, they're being kind enough to loop us in and say, like, hey, you guys were some of the first to do this. What do you think about this? What about that? And that's been really nice to just be a part of, kind of moving forward. And at the same time, from the medical kind of standardization angle of it, the people have reached out and they're like, hey, how do we go about making this the standard of care? What are your thoughts on that? What are your, how has it been positive? How has it been negative? Kind of trying to streamline those things and get that information into, proper documentation and convince other physicians who haven't had a chance to use them or haven't needed to. Like, it's possible that, people that aren't doing this specific procedure had no reason to use it, but now they think there is a reason to use it, and getting it into their hands and providing, what little bit of knowledge that we've accumulated doing this and getting that out. Thankfully we've had a couple larger companies come up to us and say, we will support you if, a second wave of requests come in, or, if this virus, what we're, as a medical community, we think that there's going to likely be a second wave, especially when the flu season comes around and things like that. How are you going to prepare for that? Do we want to make a bunch of more boxes? Do we want to just wait for requests? So we're trying to plan that and just decide what's the best way to go about that. But from our perspective, at least, thankfully, things have settled down a little bit, and we're slowly getting back to somewhat of our normal lives, though we're obviously still in the middle of the pandemic. And, when I'm working, I don't even see them very much because I have to enter the back of the house and strip naked in the backyard and, you know, go straight to the shower and all those kind of things to not bring a contamination home. And so that hasn't changed yet. And that's probably going to just be our lives for a while. But everybody all over the planet has started to integrate all these new protocols into their existence that they never thought they would have to do. So, you know, in no way is this unique to us. In no way at all.
No, we all have to adjust, and let's hope that that's going to bring, you know, a slowdown in the numbers of new positive cases, and eventually, if there's going to be a second wave, it's going to be less devastating. We would definitely be more prepared to that. So, hopefully, capable of reacting better. So, I really want to thank you both so much for being with us today, telling us and sharing your story. That was inspiring, and it's so good to hear from people around the world doing their best to actually help out and give to people what they need to be more protective and safe. So thank you both very much.
Absolutely. And we're honored that you even wanted to talk to us. So we're very flattered.
It was our pleasure to interview you, and I'm really, it resonates a lot with what we do, and I'm really happy to get the chance to meet you both. So thanks everybody for following this interview. This was part of a distributed answer to a global crisis, the online event organized by FabLab OpenDot in Milan, within the program of distributed design, the European founded project that we are part of. Together with us and Dr. Benjamin Reeser and Tina Reeser and Radia. Okay. So the entire family is here with us, and it was really a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much again, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Take care, everybody, and be safe.